They chose him. Even after everything he did, they chose him. I remember standing in my parents' driveway with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of things I had grabbed in the 20 minutes my mother gave me to collect myself and leave. It was February, the kind of cold that gets into your teeth. I kept waiting for one of them to come outside, to say something, to at least watch me go. The door stayed closed. My name is Claire. I was 29 years old the night my family decided that their relationship with my ex-husband mattered more than their relationship with me. I had been married to Daniel for 3 years. We met when I was 25, fresh out of a graduate accounting program. Hired at the same mid-size firm where he worked as a senior financial analyst. He was charming in that specific way that only reveals itself as dangerous later. Attentive. Certain. The kind of man who made you feel like the most important person in the room and then, slowly, made sure you had no other rooms to be in. By the time I understood what was happening, I had quietly stopped seeing my friends. I had turned down a promotion because Daniel said the hours would put a strain on us. I had started explaining myself constantly why I came home at a certain time, why I texted a certain person, why I looked tired, why I seemed distant. I had become someone I did not recognize. And I had done it so gradually that I thought it was just growing up. The marriage ended when I found out he had been having an affair for nearly the entire time we were together. Not a brief mistake. Not a moment of weakness. A sustained, deliberate relationship with a woman he had met before we even got engaged. When I confronted him, he did not apologize. He told me I had been difficult to be with. He said I was too sensitive and too focused on my career, and that I had pushed him towards someone who actually appreciated him. He said it the way someone reads a prepared statement. I filed for divorce. I thought the hardest part was over. I did not know my parents had already spoken to Daniel. My father had always liked him. That was the word liked. My father liked the way Daniel dressed, liked the way he talked about investments, liked that he played golf and knew which fork to use at a formal dinner. My mother liked that he came from what she called a stable background, which meant his family had money and spoke quietly and hosted Christmas parties where no one argued. Daniel had spent 3 years being exactly what my parents wanted in a son-in-law, which meant he had spent 3 years being very careful around them in ways he was never careful around me. When I told my parents about the affair, my mother asked me what I had done to contribute to the distance in the marriage. My father asked whether I had considered counseling before jumping to divorce. I told them about the woman, about how long it had been happening, about the messages I had found. My mother said relationships were complicated. My father said Daniel had already called him and explained his side of things, and that it was important to hear both perspectives. I sat in their living room and understood that I was not going to be believed. I tried for 2 months. I showed up. I explained. I asked them to hear me. But Daniel was still calling my father. Daniel was still having dinner with my parents. Daniel had told them that I was unstable, that I had become paranoid and controlling, that the divorce was something I had pushed him into out of spite. And my parents wanted to believe a version of events where no one they admired had done something unforgivable. It was easier. Daniel had given them an easier story. The night my mother told me to leave, I had come over to ask if I could stay with them for a few weeks while my apartment lease was sorted out. I had already moved out of the home Daniel and I shared. I was staying in a short-term rental that was costing me more than I could afford. I just needed a few weeks. My mother said that having me in the house was causing tension. She said my father had been stressed. She said maybe it would be better if I gave everyone some space to process things. She said this standing in the kitchen doorway, not quite making eye contact, the way she talked about things she had already decided. I asked her if she understood what she was doing. She said she was sorry but that she thought this was for the best. I drove to my sister's apartment on the other side of the city. It was almost 11 at night. Megan was 26, 3 years younger than me, working as a physical therapist and living in a one-bedroom place that she had decorated with plants and secondhand furniture and photographs of us as kids. I had not called ahead. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes before I could make myself go up. She opened the door before I knocked. She had heard my car. She took one look at me and stepped back to let me in, and she did not say anything at all for a long time. She just made tea. I slept on her couch that night. And the night after that. By the end of the first week, she had bought an air mattress and set it up in the corner of her living room and told me it was mine for as long as I needed it. She moved her yoga mat and her bookshelf to make room. She rearranged her entire small life around the fact that I needed somewhere to land. I told her she did not have to do this. She told me to stop saying that. Those first months were the kind of hard that doesn't announce itself dramatically. It was just a persistent low-grade weight that sat on everything. I went to work. I came home. I ate whatever Megan had cooked because she cooked almost every night, big batches of things that could last several days, and she always made enough for two without making it a thing. I handled the divorce paperwork during my lunch breaks. I cried in my car more times than I can count. I did not cry in front of Megan because I was trying very hard not to need too much from a person who was already giving me so much. She noticed anyway. She always noticed. There was one night, maybe 6 weeks in, when I came home from a particularly bad day. I had run into my mother at the grocery store, of all places, and my mother had been polite in that horrifying way where someone is polite specifically to make you feel the absence of warmth, and I sat down on the air mattress and I could not get up. I just sat there. Megan came out of her bedroom, looked at me, and said, "We are not doing anything tonight except watching terrible television and eating ice cream directly from the container." She said it like it was a prescription, like it was medical advice. I laughed for the first time in weeks. She was doing this while maintaining her own life, her own work, her own stress. She had a boyfriend at the time who, I later found out, had expressed some discomfort with the indefinite living arrangement. She had told him that her sister needed her, and that if that was a problem, then they needed to have a different conversation. That relationship ended about 4 months after I moved in. She never told me that was part of why. I only found out a year later when she mentioned it in passing, casually, the way she handled most of the weight she carried for other people. I stayed with Megan for 8 months. I found a small apartment of my own in October of that year, a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an older building with good windows and a kitchen that got the morning light. Signing the lease felt like the first decision I had made entirely for myself in years. I called Megan from the parking lot after, and she made me describe every room in detail, even though she was going to see it in person the following weekend. I started rebuilding. Slowly. I had been quietly excellent at my job for years, and now I had no reason to minimize that. I went after the promotion I had turned down. I got it. I started running in the mornings, not for any particular reason, just because I needed something that was mine and that no one had opinions about. I made friends at work, actual friends, people I had coffee with, and texted about things that had nothing to do with my professional life. I began to remember what it felt like to be a person who occupied space comfortably. I did not speak to my parents. They did not reach out. I heard through relatives that Daniel had eventually moved in with the woman he had been seeing. I heard that my parents had attended a party at Daniel's family's home. I filed this information away in a place I tried not to visit too often. The divorce was finalized 13 months after I filed. As part of the settlement, I received half of the equity from the home we had owned together, a sum that had taken nearly a year of negotiation to reach, because Daniel had initially claimed the home had been purchased primarily with his assets, which was demonstrably false given the financial records I had meticulously maintained. My attorney called me the morning the check cleared and used the word vindicated. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee and let that word sit for a while. I also discovered, through the financial disclosure process, that Daniel had been making certain investments using joint account funds during the period of the affair, investments he had not disclosed and that had not been listed in our shared financial documents. My attorney described this as a significant problem for Daniel. The court described it in terms that resulted in a revised settlement. The final number was substantially higher than what I had initially been offered. Megan took me out to dinner when I told her. She ordered a bottle of wine and gave a toast that was completely unhinged and funny, and made the couple at the next table laugh even though they had no idea what we were talking about. I was 33 by then. 4 years had passed since the night I had stood in my parents' driveway with my suitcases. I had not seen my mother or my father in that entire time. There had been a card at Christmas one year, no letter, just a card, signed with both their names in my mother's handwriting. I had not responded. I had also not thrown it away, which told me something about myself that I tried not to analyze too carefully. My apartment was better now. I had bought furniture I actually chose. I had a kitchen that I cooked in, really cooked in, something I had forgotten I enjoyed. I had a window in the living room with a view of the street below, and a chair positioned exactly right to read in the late afternoon. My life felt, for the first time in a long time, like mine. It was a Tuesday evening in March when the buzzer rang. I was not expecting anyone. Megan had a work event. I was making pasta and listening to a playlist I had put together over the past year, the kind of playlist that only makes sense to the person who made it. I pressed the intercom button and said hello. My mother's voice came through the speaker. I stood there for a long moment, with my hand still on the intercom button. I could hear street noise behind her. She said my name again, gently, like she was afraid of how it would land. I let her in. I turned the stove off. I stood in the middle of my kitchen and told myself I was fine, which I mostly believed. By the time the knock came at my door, I had decided that I was going to hear whatever they had come to say, and that I was going to stay in my own apartment in my own chair, and I was not going to perform anything for anyone. I opened the door. My parents looked older. 4 years does that in ways you don't anticipate until you see someone again after a long absence. My father looked smaller somehow, or maybe just tired. My mother had cut her hair shorter than I remembered. She was carrying a dish covered in foil, something she had brought, the way she always brought food to anything difficult, as if a casserole could serve as an explanation. I stepped back and let them in. I did not hug them. I gestured to the couch and I sat in the chair across from it. The good chair, the one by the window, and I waited. My father spoke first. He said that they needed to talk to me about something. He said that there were things they had learned, things about Daniel, about the timeline, about what had actually been going on, and that they had been wrong. And that he was sorry. He said it like he had rehearsed it, which he probably had. I asked him what they had learned. This is the part they had not anticipated me asking for directly. My mother looked at her hands. My father cleared his throat. What had happened, as it came out in pieces over the next hour, was this. Daniel's girlfriend, the woman he had been seeing during our marriage, had ended their relationship the previous year. After she left him, she had spoken to mutual acquaintances about the relationship, about when it had started, about certain things Daniel had said about me during those years. One of these mutual acquaintances had eventually, circuitously, passed some of this information back to people who knew my parents. What Daniel had told his girlfriend about me, and what she had eventually repeated, was that he had been deliberately isolating me during our marriage, that he had discussed strategies for doing this with her, that the characterization of me as paranoid and unstable had been something he had carefully constructed and deployed in advance with her, and then with my parents because he had known the marriage was going to end, and he had wanted to control the narrative when it did. My mother's voice broke when she got to this part. She said she didn't know. She kept saying that she didn't know. She didn't know. I believed her. That was the complicated part. I believed that she had not known, and I also knew that she had chosen not to look too hard at the things she had preferred not to see. Those two things were both true at the same time. I did not cry. I had spent a lot of time, over 4 years, imagining what this conversation would feel like, and in most of those imagined versions I had been angrier, or more devastated, or more relieved. What I actually felt was something quieter and stranger, not the clean vindication I had hoped for, but something more like exhaustion at the waste of it. All of it. The years they had missed. The dinners that hadn't happened. The person I had become, partially, in the absence of their presence. Both because of what that absence had cost me, and because of what I had built without them. I told them that. I said it carefully, not cruelly, but honestly. I told my father that I had stood in their driveway in February 4 years ago with my suitcases, and the door had stayed closed. I told my mother that I had asked her directly, more than once, to see me, and she had chosen a version of events that was more comfortable. I told them that I understood they had been deceived, and I also told them that they had not been entirely passive in their deceiving. My father did not argue with this. He nodded, slowly, and he looked at the floor. My mother asked if there was any possibility of repairing things. She said the word carefully, like she was aware of how much work it was carrying. I told her I didn't know yet. I told her that I needed time to think about it and that I wasn't going to make a decision tonight and that they needed to understand that whatever happened next would happen on a timeline I set, not one that was convenient for anyone else. I told her that if they wanted to rebuild something, that was a process that would take a long time and require them to sit with a significant amount of discomfort without expecting me to manage that discomfort for them. My mother said she understood. My father said he was proud of me. He said it a little awkwardly, looking at the apartment, at the life I had made. He said I had done well for myself. I think he meant it as a compliment. I think he also meant it as an acknowledgement of what I had managed without them, which is a different thing, and I think somewhere underneath it he knew that too. They stayed for about an hour, and then they left. My mother left the casserole dish. I sat in my chair for a long time after they went, looking out the window at the street. A couple walked by below with a dog. A delivery person locked a bike to a post. The city went about its evening. I called Megan. She was still at her work event, but she stepped outside to take my call. I told her what had happened, and she listened without interrupting, which was one of the many reasons I loved her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it. I told her I felt okay. Not happy, not sad in the way I might have expected, just okay. Like something had shifted slightly. Like a window that had been painted shut for years had opened a little, just enough to let some air in. Megan said, "That sounds about right." Then she said, "Also, I need you to know that if they ever pull anything like that again, I will personally." And then, she described several things she would do that were extremely creative and completely implausible, and made me laugh so hard I had to lean against the wall. I heated up my mother's casserole when I hung up. It was very good. She had always been a good cook. I ate it standing at my kitchen counter because that was what I felt like doing. Looking at my apartment, my good chair, my morning light kitchen, the playlist still running quietly on the speaker, the whole small ordered life I had built from the pieces of a different one, and I thought about what Megan had given up so I could have a place to land when everything else fell through. I had already been planning to move to a larger apartment in the fall. 2 bedrooms, better location. I had been looking at listings with that thought half-formed in the back of my mind, and now I let myself think it clearly. The second bedroom had a window and good closet space, and there was absolutely no reason the furniture in it could not include a real bed and a real desk, and whatever else a person needed to have a room that was actually hers. I texted Megan a link to the listing I had been looking at. She texted back 3 seconds later. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" I texted. "The room is bigger than your current bedroom, and the building has a rooftop." She sent back a string of emojis that required some interpretation. I sent, "I'll need a roommate. You'd be doing me a favor." She called me instead of texting back. I could hear that she was smiling before she even spoke. "You don't need a roommate," she said. "No," I said. "But I want one. Specifically you. With an actual bed, and an actual room that is yours, and a lease that has your name on it, not just mine." She made a sound that was not quite crying, and not quite laughing. I told her she had let me sleep on her air mattress for 8 months. I told her she had rearranged her furniture and her life, and apparently ended a relationship. Yes, I had known about that for a while. I had just been waiting for the right time to say it, and that I had been trying to figure out how to repay that for 3 years, and that the answer was not money, it was just this. A room with her name on it, in a place where she was not doing me a favor, but living her actual life, alongside mine, the way sisters were supposed to. She said yes. We moved in together the following October. The apartment had a rooftop with string lights and a view of the city at night that we sat on for the first time, with a bottle of wine on the evening we got our keys. Megan had set her bedroom up exactly how she wanted it, which involved more plants than I would have predicted, and a very large mirror she had been wanting for 2 years, and a lamp she found at an estate sale that she described as aggressively whimsical, and that I secretly also loved. We were sitting on the roof that first night, looking at the lights, when Megan said, "Do you think you'll let them back in? Mom and Dad?" I looked at the city. I thought about the casserole dish, still sitting in my cabinet, which I had washed and kept without quite deciding why. I said I thought so. Not all the way, not immediately, but some of the way. with conditions, with a pace that I controlled. I said that I had stopped needing them to apologize in the right words at the right time, which had happened somewhere in the third year without me noticing, and that what I wanted now was just honesty from them about what they had chosen, and from me about what I was and wasn't willing to offer back. Megan nodded. She refilled my glass. She said, "You're a lot more generous than I am." I told her she was the most generous person I had ever met in my life. Which was true, and which she waved off immediately. Which was also very her. We sat there until it got cold, which in our city in October does not take long. Then we went inside to our apartment, with 2 names on the lease and 2 keys on 2 separate hooks by the door, and Megan made tea the way she had the first night I had showed up on her doorstep, quietly, without being asked, and set a mug in front of me. The life I had now was not the life I had planned. It was not the life I had been performing for my parents or building around a man who had decided before I even knew there was a decision being made. It was not the life I would have chosen from the options I could see at 29, standing in a February driveway with the cold getting into my teeth. It was, I thought, considerably better. Not because anything had been fixed or resolved in the clean way that stories are supposed to end. My parents and I were still finding our way back to something. Daniel existed somewhere in the city, in a version of his life I had no interest in tracking. The years that had been difficult were still the years that had happened, and always would be. But Megan was sitting across from me at a kitchen table that belonged to both of us, and outside the window the city was doing what cities do at night, and my life fit around me the way a life is supposed to fit, not perfectly, but honestly, and I had built it myself, with some help from the only person who had never once asked me to be smaller so she could be more comfortable. I think that is the part they never tell you. Not the revenge, not the vindication, not the moment someone finally says you were right. It is smaller and slower and better than all of that. It is a Tuesday night and the pasta is cold and your sister is laughing about something that isn't even that funny, and you realize you are not waiting for anything. You are not holding your breath. You are just there. In your own life, finally.